Hello, Tom Maguire. I'm going to be reviewing the book Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor. This book came out earlier in the year, sometime in May, I think it was. I listened to the audible version, which is really good. It's a fantastic book. It's not one that I would consider to be absolutely amazing, but it's really worth a read or a listen. It's really good for personal development. It's really good for, really important for your own health and physical health. Goes hand in hand with mental health basically and success as far as I'm concerned. Um, Timing, I suppose, with the COVID-19 stuff is a bit strange, when we're kind of at a stage where breathing is obviously, something that's kind of in the consciousness of everyone at the minute, and this book has kind of come out at just the right sort of time, really. So it's just really good advice. It's actually quite an entertaining book as well. He's had problems himself over the years, had to have operations. He talks about how the human skull has kind of changed over the years since we stopped eating sort of chewier foods, the processed foods. We don't need to chew as much, so our jaws have kind of weakened and our bone structure has kind of changed. And they reckon that the bone structure in your face can actually change and adapt right into old age, apparently. Which is something I will look a bit more into because that sounds very interesting. It's caused me to make positive changes in my life. I'm breathing through my nose a lot more now. I'm trying to breathe through my nose when I'm running, when I'm weight training and things, which is difficult because when you're really pushing yourself, you feel the need to get as much oxygen in as you can, and going through your nose doesn't always feel the most efficient way of doing that. I think it's kind of a training process. It takes a bit of time to get used to it. I make sure when I'm going to sleep at night, I'm breathing through my nose as much as possible. But yeah, there's a lot of research put into it, a lot of really interesting stories from history. He talks about Wim Hof and the Wim Hof breathing method. Wim Hof's really interesting. If you don't know about him, check him out. There's loads of stuff on YouTube. He's done some really interesting stuff. He climbed Everest in next to nothing. He's the Iceman, basically. He can cope. He's trained himself to really cope with cold. It's quite astonishing, and he has these breathing techniques that really kind of warm him up. And there's a lot of stuff around breathing. It's one of those things, a bit like sleep, that we kind of take for granted and we kind of get into our own lazy habits with. And actually, if you become more mindful and pay a bit more attention, you can calm yourself down. You can lower your blood pressure. And he did an experiment where he was forced to keep his mouth open for like 10 nights, I think it was. So he was mouth breathing for a period of time, and they did the stats. His blood pressure had gone up. He was feeling really rough. But he obviously did it for the research of the book. And then went back to nose breathing afterwards, and he immediately felt so much better. There's a story in there of a woman who had, is it scoliosis, kind of a curvature of the spine, and she basically breathed herself back to health, and she talked a lot about that and taught a lot about that for years afterwards. There are some amazing stories in the book. He talks about how there used to be 3 or 4 different species of human on the planet at one stage. Hominids and what's the cavemen called? Oh, God, my mind's gone blank. I'm quite tired. Different species of human anyway, getting together and sharing food and stuff, and then they went off on their own ways, and different ones became extinct, and then we kind of came through, and we had more narrow kind of airways and things like that. But he talks about how over the years we've become more and more or less and less adapted to breathing well through the nose, and we can choke quite easily and things like that. So lots of science around that, which I found quite interesting. He talks about the power of prayer and how prayer can be really important for breathing, and how that's possibly how prayer has lasted over the sort of hundreds of thousands of years. Which is interesting because in the book 438 Days When He's Lost at Sea, the Mexican guy who's lost at sea, which I reviewed that book before. Is it 438 Days? Yeah, this one by Jonathan Franklin. That's a really good book. And they talk about one of the reasons he managed to survive for so long was because he was doing things like praying. He was going through rituals each day and he was praying. And they reckon the fact that he was praying that alone was just whether he had faith or not, which may well have helped him, but they were saying that the act of praying just kept him calm, slowed his breathing down, occupied his thoughts with things other than the reality of what was going on, and they reckon that was one of the main reasons that he managed to kind of get through it. So meditation, is so important when it comes to breathing, and yoga, and I've spoken to people about yoga. My coach talks about yoga and says how so many people who really benefit from yoga. it's something that I will get into hopefully at some point. I certainly intend to. But yeah, I've just found that breathing through the nose, just slowly back out. I always thought it was in through the nose, out through the mouth, but he reckons it's in and out through the nose. So I try and do that when I'm running, like I say, when I'm weight training as well. I try and just be more mindful of my breath, basically. And I think that's probably the message, is just to be more mindful. Can't think what else to say about it. It's not an amazing book, but it is good, definitely. I think it gets 4.5 stars, which is fairly justified. It's probably, to me, I would say it's like a 4-star book probably, which is still really good, to be fair. I think a lot of stuff gets overly reviewed, really, and overrated. So I think a good solid 4 stars is a good book. If you are keen on being as healthy as possible, then you should take breathing seriously in the same way you should take your sleep seriously. I would say after reading this and reading the Matthew Walker Why We Sleep book, that the 2 most important things for our health are breathing and sleep, basically. You know, you can eat as well as you want, you can exercise as well as you want, but if you're not breathing properly and you're not sleeping properly, it's not going to count for very much. You know, I think eating and exercise is really important. It's way up there, but I think sleep and breathing are the 2 most important, basically. And he talks about how lung capacity has a direct correlation to how long you live. So the bigger your lung capacity, the longer you're likely to live, which is probably really obvious to some people, but I'd never really heard it put that way before. And apparently that's something that's been kind of known for a while, but not necessarily as common knowledge as you would expect. So I found that quite interesting. He talks about how sprinters tend to cough and splutter and feel pain after training because they're putting themselves through that real intensive training. I suppose when you're doing 100 meters, you're barely breathing at all, are you, really? Whereas other sort of long distance runners, particularly in the old days, I reckon in the 50s and stuff, were trained more to breathe through their nose. They'd hold water in their mouth while they went around the track, so they were breathing through their nose properly, whereas nowadays it tends to have sort of disappeared a little bit. So yeah, really interesting. I've heard Joe Rogan interviews James Nestor as well, so it's worth looking at that interview if you want something a bit shorter. But I think I haven't come away completely and utterly convinced of the techniques necessarily and the finer details, but it's definitely made me more mindful about breathing, and I will be making sure I try to breathe a lot more through my nose. I found that I just tend to in through the nose, then almost just kind of not blow out of the nose, but almost just kind of hum, just so that it comes out nice and slowly. And I just find the act of just slowing the breath down does actually calm me down, whereas in the past I'd have been big deep breath and I'd have been probably breathing out too quickly. I think if you can slow the exhale right down as well, and then even hold it for a little while and just slowly back in, I think that makes a big difference. It sounds really silly, but I think it does. So yeah, James Nestor, Breath, the new science of a lost art. Very worthwhile. Please like and subscribe, and I will keep these videos going. I think this is like the 65th book I've got through so far this year. I intend to get fairly close to 100 by Christmas, hopefully. And check out my Maguire Total Coaching page as well on Facebook and Instagram. Cheers, thank you.